we got to talk about this claim that you'll often hear, and we are continually being asked about this. 97% of scientists agree on climate change. So generally, what people will do is they will say, when they find out that our work is different, disagrees from some of the things that they had been taught, they say, well,
Well,
97% of scientists disagree with you. So,
yes, I have been personally challenged by Al Gore once. I mean, that do you mean that you disagree with a 2,000 scientists from the IPCC? I say, yes, sir. Should I educate you on what science is about, Vice President Gore?
yeah,
Anyway,
well,
it's a tongue in cheek, but it's just terrible to try to treat science by voting. It's just by narrative, by all this. It's ridiculous. But anyway,
yeah,
this is the world we live in. Ronan
yeah,
now can explain this sort of. By the way, we don't speak on this issue without actually very thorough investigation. I want to give credit to Michael and Ronan because this topic has been what you call, people thought that, oh, we understand everything. But
yeah,
every time Ronan and Michael study this issue, they will come up with something unique insight because they read everything. And then I think that's a result of this, why we are confident in speaking about this, and we felt we have something great to offer. So we
yeah,
hope that you will pay attention to this a bit. Plus, that if
yeah.
you have any question, please reach out to us. We're always ready to answer good questions. So please.
So if we look at this is just the timeline of. So I think most people that are watching this would have heard that 97% of scientists agree, or 90% or 95%, all of these things. I just, and this is, where did that come from? And actually, when you look at it, in the beginning, in the 90s, you would hear it, as Willie was saying there, they'd say
I'll go.
the overwhelming scientific consensus. But these were just assertions, like made by NGOs, non-governmental organizations like Greenpeace, and then uh, the activists like our politicians like Al Gore. There was no, it was just an assertion people were making. The first attempt, it seems, to actually claim that there was it was
It
a
was a
consensus
good, a good
was,
scientific work, yeah.
yeah, well, I call it pseudoscientific, but anyway,
Rona,
scientific.
Michael has a great saying, right? We are fighting campaign versus science. I mean, that's a problem
Yeah,
because we have a
yeah,
huge disadvantage. By the way, this is why our mind really like this kind of headlines and all this nonsense and firm conclusion. They don't want to hear any issue-washy or the details. But Rona now will give a bit of details. Yeah, it started with Oreskes, Naomi Oreskes, who was at
yeah,
UCSD, and
yeah,
then now is at
yeah.
Harvard.
Yeah, so Oreskes 2004 was just a one-page article. She went and she looked at abstracts that had the keywords global climate change. And then she looked through the abstract. The abstract is that short summary
From a
of the
scientific
scientific
paper.
paper. It's like you saw a few. We were looking at in part one. We were looking at some abstracts,
Abstract.
just that 250 word summary of what the paper is, and she skimmed through, or maybe read through, 928 and said, "Oh, none of them disagree with the consensus." If that was her opinion, and so
Yes, Al
therefore
Gore
she
in her
said,
book, in his book, An Inconvenient Truth, have that number 98 versus zero. I mean,
"Yeah."
round of applause.
So that the actual surveys, so that's just readings, abstracts of papers. The actual surveys of the scientists asking them what they do was Doran Zimmerman in 2009. Now, they surveyed, this was Maggie Zimmerman, was a master's student working for, is it
Oh,
Peter
Peter
Doran?
Doran, University of Illinois. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they surveyed. They got results from 3,000, more than 3,000 Earth scientists, and the initial results actually only like 80 something percent. We'll talk about that in a minute. Actually agreed with what they thought, but they then went and got a subset of 79 of those 3,000, and they said, well, 77 out of the seven, or you
Right.
could
7 out of
76,
79 is 97. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, 97%. And that was it. And then that went viral, and people started repeating that. Then in 2013, there was another one which is not surveying scientists, but again doing what Oreskes is, just surveying the abstracts. And they said they went and they claimed only 3% of the papers expressing a position disagreed with the consensus. So then they say 97% of papers agree. Then Barack Obama misquoted that.
By the way, in real time, is the sitting president of the United States was tweeting this out, so therefore they get a lot of eyeballs. I mean,
Yeah.
but the paper is completely flawed. Yeah, we'll explain.
And then more recently, you have Linus and
Hardliners, yeah, yeah,
they claim to have done an update
they have
of
increased.
Crocodile.
It's 99%.
Yeah,
Exceed.
I think they're even saying it could be 99.7% or something. Let me get onto that. But Michael, this was
Michael led this study. Yeah,
yeah,
beautiful.
this was a report that we can get. You can find it on ResearchGate, and I think we can put a link in the description for this report that we did on Greenpeace, which one of our co-authors on this was Dr. Patrick Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Greenpeace.
Greenpeace
And
itself.
He was, in fact, the only scientist in the group.
that
Uh,
started of the founders.
That's true. Yeah, yeah.
And it's a well worth reading the full report. But for this particular discussion, in section 4, we have a discussion on the use of 95%. So, Michael,
96,
do you want
97,
to
98. Yeah.
wait? What is the significance of that number of 97% of 95%?
Power of
well,
advertisement. Yeah.
it's you can never say something is 100% because if somebody then finds a flaw or finds some that isn't, then your argument falls. But if you say 95% or something like that, then someone comes on and says, well, somebody disagrees with that. Then they can say, yeah, but there are 5%. But when you're coming to marketing something, or if you're trying to push an agenda,
Yeah.
you try to, they will come up with something like 95% or 96% or
By the
92.
way, Michael, can you explain that this is actually well stated also in so-called the handbook of all these NGOs, especially Greenpeace people, right?
Oh,
What's the
yes,
book by the guy Rose?
yes.
Yeah, well, Chris Rose gave some things. I'm not sure does he specifically mention. I think he gives. Yeah, I think the idea is if it's more than 90%, when people will automatically in their head say pretty much everybody, and they found that even back in the 70s and 80s when they would be marketing like cat food, 9 out of 10 cats prefer this,
Right,
or
right, right.
9 out of 10 dentists
For
recommend this
the dental
toothpaste.
toothpaste, yeah,
Yeah,
we all
yeah,
like Crest. Everybody use Crest.
yeah, and so if you say 9 out of 10, then people say,
Very acceptable number.
yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. Let's move
And,
on.
and
It is a
what they
marketing tactic.
realized, yeah, it's a marketing tool, and people realized if you just say it, that a lot of the times you can get away with it, and it just get if people do it. So most of the 97%. So the idea, the people that are doing this, they wanted to find the figure 97% or 95 or 96 or 98 has to be greater than 90, less than 100%. And so the first two, again, the like you said, science. I do think pseudoscience is suitable for like Oreskes, or the claim of 97% because it is. It has a high profile paper journal,
Yeah, in Science
just
magazine.
one page. And the same with the Doran Zimmerman. And, like actually, if you read Maggie Zimmerman's thesis, it was it's quite detailed. And she actually apparently, after decided to leave the whole field because she started off thinking, oh, yeah, all scientists agree. And then when she got all the surveys in, she started to realize actually a lot of scientists don't agree. But essentially,
Okay,
what they did
hold
is,
on, let's go to the details. Yeah,
yeah, they asked two questions. They said
it's
the
hard
the
for people
key
to
one
read.
is,
So just read it out quick.
yeah, yeah. They said, when compared with pre 1800s levels, do you think that mean global temperatures have generally risen, fallen, or remained relatively constant? So the that a lot of people, if you're not familiar, the that was a period known as the Little Ice Age. So is it warmer than the Little Ice Age? Is what they're saying. And then, do you think human activity is a significant contributing factor in changing mean global temperatures? Now, a lot of the public, when you hear the word significant, significant has a different meaning to scientists than to most of the world. Most of the world, when they hear significant, that means you think substantial. But in science, it has a specific meaning because you can say something is statistically significant, for instance, if it's more than 5% chance. So people will, when a scientist says significant, that means non-zero, or not negligible. So when you ask a scientist, do you
You
think
have
human
you
activity?
have different levels of significance too.
Yeah,
You can say it's significant at the 1% level, or it's
yeah,
significant at the 5% level,
Hey,
or
Ronan,
I-
again, science cannot work by consensus. Let's move on a little
yeah,
bit.
yeah. So if you were just saying, so most scientists, a significant just means edited, maybe 5% would be significant,
Right,
whereas
right.
most people, you're taking the majority. Um, Only 80%, or less than 80% of the respondents actually said yes, they think it's significant. Also, they didn't say what type of human activity. Didn't ask, was it CO2 or greenhouse gases, urban heat islands, anything like that. But what they did is they then divided and they found a little subset of 79, actually 77, and they said
Yes,
75 of these 77 said yes.
yeah.
That's
Less than
not.
97%. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah.
so we there have been other studies since then, and what we've realized is we've compiled together some of the main ones. And here's the thing: actual surveys of the scientists. What do scientists say? So 90 to 97% of scientists agree that there's been climate change, that the climate has changed, and that
There
there's
has
been
been
global
global warming.
warming. I
so do we.
agree. What?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. Now, the majority of scientists, but not all of them, it's not 97%, like maybe 70% or more, believe human activity is responsible for at least some of that. So
Again,
that's a
at least some
weaker,
of that 1%, 2%, 10%, I don't know, 90%.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if you want to just say that and go to weaker and say 70% of scientists agree, yeah, or even
But what you
78,
also should be saying, but 30% don't.
yeah, yeah, 20 to 30. It depends on the
But
survey.
then look at the next bullet point.
Yeah, but if we were to do the same thing, you could say, well, actually, 60% or the majority of scientists also believe at least some is natural.
Yeah.
So, and then here, this is really it. So we've colored from red is entirely human caused to gray is don't know, blue, dark blue is entirely natural. So you can see it's true that there's more that think it's entirely human caused than think it's entirely natural. But actually, most scientists think it's a mixture of both. And they debate, they're not sure on exactly how much.
Yeah.
So,
So this
with
is a
that's
great
what the
slide that Ronan has pulled out from these statistics, all these
yeah.
surveys,
So
and
next time
shown
you
that you can
hear
go either way. All this polling stuff is a bit, yeah.
Yeah, so next time you hear somebody saying 97% of scientists or 90% of
Bring up
scientists
this graph.
What,
agree
what,
on
what you should
climate
say
change.
is, this is some sort of advertising statement.
Yeah, well, you can't say
When
that.
you
Yeah,
hear it
yeah,
like
Yes,
yeah,
you can, Ronan. Come on, you should be able to say that freely.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can
you
just
can say
say
that.
that.
Or the other way, what I was trying to say is next time somebody says 97% of scientists agree on climate change, you can say, yes, they agree that there has been climate change.
Right.
And then they say, oh,
But
but
it doesn't
human
tell us
caused.
anything.
I'll say, no. No. Then look at these. And by the way, these are surveys of the public, and actually, it's not too different because the majority of the public agree the climate is changes. A majority of the public believe human activity is responsible for at least some, and the majority believe at least some is natural. Um, so they're not that different. The public kind of is agreeing. So again,
Oh, there
it's
you
hard
go. We
to.
got a consensus there.
But let's just talk about this.
Yeah, yeah. This one is very, very big. We got to talk about
Yeah,
this.
so this is if you're not doing so. This is Barack Obama was president of the U.S. at the time,
At
and
that
he
time.
tweets out this study, which is kind of unusual for a president to be tweeting out a scientific study. So it got a lot of attention, and they said this is Cook et al. They said they examined 11,944
That's right.
climate abstracts from 1991 to 2021, and they found among abstracts expressing a position on anthropogenic global warming or AGW,
That's a keyword. Expressing a position on.
yeah, 97.1% endorsed the consensus position that humans are causing global warming. Now, notice this is not what Barack Obama he said 97% of scientists agree climate change is
Yep.
real, man-made and dangerous. Now that's and he's linking to this study. That's misinformation or disinformation. It's not,
Yes, we
not
can
clear.
accuse the president of the United States for doing that. Indeed.
Well, maybe he didn't read it, but
Because
he tweeted
they
out on
really
his
don't care
account.
much about science. I mean, science
But
is just
the,
a convenient,
the bottom
convenient
line is
title.
that it's climate abstracts. It wasn't a survey of scientists. And then it just says that humans are causing global warming, some global warming. It doesn't say that it's all. And then they didn't say that it was dangerous.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
also not about scientists. It's not number
Yeah.
of scientists. It's number of abstract.
Now,
Sorry.
Willie, you did a paper with David
Yes, the
Legatis
great
and a
David
colleague.
Legates of University of Delaware and Christopher Mountain and William Embrix. Yeah.
Okay, and so you
When
went
we
to
saw this, I mean, we just say this is such a puzzling nonsense. Then we should actually dig deep, go really deep into the details. The first thing you realize is that out of the almost 12,000, almost 8,000 of them express no position. And then you can see there is only 3,000 implied position. That's 25% on your left if you look at the graph. And then only 1,000 of them explicitly have some claim and rather. So that's 8%. Now let's zoom in the 8%, the 987 abstract. You will see that it's a, oops. Now we got a little technical problem. Anyway, the bottom line, let's hope Ronan can get back. But the bottom line is that when we look at the details of the even the 64 papers that they claim to have an opinion, that claim to have a consensus on this human caused global warming, we actually don't even believe in the 64 because we checked all 64 abstract and we found that only 41 of the papers says that believe have this consensus global warming. If you take 64 divided by 12,000, that's 0.5% actually. That's a proper way to view this, not 97%. And then if you take 41 over 12,000, that's 0.3%. So I think you can really, really debunk this very cleanly because this is just numerology. That 97% is actually a very specific nonsense that they created. So, Mr. Cook, I apologize. You are such a great politician, and congratulations. And of course, you belongs to the class of President Obama. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. Politicians should never impose their worldview on science. Science is such a precious topic that it should be untouchable. So Ronan is back now. So
Yeah, yeah,
I think Ronan, I kind of go through my words. You just maybe put back the slide. That should work. I think
yeah,
it's sufficient
yeah,
for us.
yeah. Okay, so we can go. So shall I move on to now? Let's move on.
I believe we should move on. Yes.
So this one here, we're looking at the Lynas et al. Study. They claimed they got even more. They actually claim more than 99%.
By the way,
Of,
Mark Lynas is also a well-known activist who threw a pie on Beyond Lombok. If some of you may care to know,
well,
he did this
I
paper
will.
because he got a
I,
fellowship at the Cornell
I,
University, so he tried to.
I will say that, like, in terms of that incident, yeah, that, so, and I think that was around 2006 or seven,
Right.
that he went to a book signing or something of Bjorn Lomborg, who was quite kind of skeptical of some of the claims. But Mark Lynas has later apologized and actually said that he was wrong, and that he agrees with Bjorn Lomborg on nuclear power, but he still is pushing this thing about the consensus. So he did
Consensus. Yeah. Yeah.
this claim quite recently. What they did is they went and they identified 88,000 papers, and this is from
First of all, you
2012.
notice that it's published in the same journal, Environmental
Yeah,
Research Letter. So you know this journal is well known to be to be the
yeah.
kind who would really happy to receive any. If you have any, like the one that we our analysis can be publishable. If you want to go to this journal, you bet that you will be rejected.
Yeah, okay,
That's the
so
way it works this day.
yeah. So
Very sad.
they did two parts. One is they randomly picked, because they didn't have time to read through all 88,000 papers. That's okay, fine. They took a random subset of 3,000. They read through the 3,000, but they claimed only four were skeptical of the IPCC position that global warming is mostly human caused. Then what they did is they used machine learning to rank all 88,000 based on how likely they were to be skeptical. And then they took the top 1,000 most likely to be skeptical. And then they looked through them and they said only 28 of them were actually skeptical. And one of those had already been mentioned. So that means in total that there's only 31 papers, according to them, were skeptical out of 88,000. Now, they admitted maybe they missed a few, but they were saying they got most of it. So how did their analysis work out? Were they representative? Because that's quite, if that result is valid, if that analysis is true, well, yeah, 0.035% out of 88,000 papers is a very small amount.
No,
Well,
notice that these are
interestingly,
partly the standard trick, okay? That the way they do this, that they were so careful, there's only few percent. We may have missed a few. That's a bit of a very standard kind of campaign, and to make themselves even far more convincing that they should be.
well,
But I think most people know that. But let's
yeah,
discuss.
in fairness to, like, Linus and all, they did a good thing where they actually provided in the supplementary material all 88,000 papers. So we looked through that, and we actually found a lot more papers just in about an hour. We went through, and because we were familiar with the literature, and we were able to identify dozens of papers that were, just quickly, just looking for people or colleagues of ours that had written papers. But I think you can speak, because four of these papers were you were co-authored,
Yes,
and so none of these four were in that random sample of 3,000.
I'm
But
curious if Mark Linus maybe aware of that. We'll just.
yeah, but
I
they
hope Mark
were,
Linus watched this. Thank you.
yeah. So paper one, these are the four papers. So paper one was included, so their machine learning
I can
algorithm did
assure you that this is
identify.
already far more selective than that, because believe me, we have published more than four papers during the period that they surveyed. It's just telling you that the sample was all highly selective.
Yeah, well, it was a sample they used. I think they used a criteria. I think they did something like global.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
used, they got 88,000. There's millions of papers out there
Yeah, out of
if you
it. Yeah.
wanted it. But like, they said that this was possibly, but they went and they said no, that this paper offered no position, and so therefore, Willie and his colleagues
It,
are part of the consensus.
but it's
So this
completely
got
untrue. The point of that paper, actually, this is a very beautiful paper. It's a paleo study of giant clams, right? You study the chemical, you measure strontium calcium ratio, then it's a sensitive to actually sea surface temperature. What we show is that for the past 2,500 years, the current warm period is just it's a bit much lower than actually medieval warm period and even the Roman warm period, which is really was basically the paper. How could you say that we believe in the consensus based on this paper? It's just,
Yeah.
sorry, not plausible. This is why reading an abstract and misrepresenting like this is rather not healthy. It's just not the right
Yeah,
thing.
it's
I'm
not a
sorry to
good.
no
That's
offense.
not how you do science. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
I should mention that, like, yeah, the abstract you really can't comment on is if you want to if your paper is skeptical of the IPCC or the consensus, you you really you want to avoid being too explicit about it in the abstract because you'll find it harder to get published. But you can describe your results in the conclusions and the things you try to
yeah,
avoid being
we
too
speak about
confrontational.
another even much more dark issues about self-censorship in that sense, because some of us skeptical scientists, it just sometimes it's just very, very hard because every time we send a paper, it took 2 to 3 years to get published. Those guys send it less than a week. They have no peer review. They have power review system, which is
Yeah.
what points to another thing that I'm sure it come up in our podcast over and over again. A lot of these issues about scientific publication is a bit unhealthy now. And let's see if we can fix it by making people more aware of it, because most of the money come from public funding. So people should be much more educated on that rather than being sitting passively to say that,
Yeah.
oh, our taxpayer money should go to fund this sort of thing, this and that. Where
I,
who decide,
yeah.
and you're not
So
doing science. Embarrassing.
just to kind of wrap up this
Yes.
study, the other three papers didn't get their machine learning didn't pick them up as being in the top 1,000 likely to be skeptical. So is that correct? Did their machine learning algorithm were those not skeptical of the consensus?
Hell no. But yeah, especially paper number 4, Mountain and all that paper was featured in the journal, the top science journal in China actually. And
Yeah,
once we got in, by the way, we're no longer able to publish in that journal because that paper created it was make the front page of the journal actually. I never had a paper being selected
uh,
as the main paper. But it was a
but
good paper. It was explaining why the model run hot. The
yeah,
ratio, of prediction versus the thing fail. I mean, but of course that you couldn't say that it didn't count as something skeptical about
yeah,
anthropology.
those two papers
It
in the
clearly
follow up.
is. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They actually went and they said no, that it's much less warmer than the models are saying. But this one is quite ironic that the Legate Suda Briggs,
Yes.
that was a prequel to the one that Willie you were
That,
talking about
that is the
earlier.
paper in a sense that what you call criticizing the Cook et al. 2013 paper, if you all
Yeah,
may recall.
you were specifically saying the perils of
Errors of consensus
consensus
knowledge.
knowledge. You were explicitly criticizing the use of claiming scientific consensus.
All right.
Anyway, that's Lynas et al. 2021.
I think let's wrap it up.
We just to wrap up, and then it's like this is. I think it's just to say you've seen. So now, hopefully, people that are watching it now know what how the sausage of 97%
Was
consensus
really was
was
made.
made, and I that it isn't true. But just to wrap up, the bottom line is, as Bert Rutan pointed out, science is not about consensus, and consensus is not science.
Yeah.
Uh, if you were doing, if all of the scientists agreed on a topic, then they stop it. It's all done. You don't need to move on. It's science thrives when people disagree with each other. Scientists are always disagreeing with each other. That's how science progresses because you say, I disagree with you, I got to prove, I got to test it. So as soon as you're getting claiming that all the scientists are, most of them are agreeing, then you know that you're not doing science. Now you're into politics.
Yeah.
And I
And
think,
by the way, another very great essay which Ronan quoted here is this lecture, excellent lecture by the late Michael Crichton, right? I mean, Michael
yeah,
Crichton is a great man, I have to say. This is a great man who actually believe in science. He's not trying to take side. He just simply say, can science speak itself? I mean, this is why I think to add flavor to that, we are also some. I mean, I myself can take a minor credit because it was my colleague Sally Balunas, because she knows Michael Crichton directly. We were able to persuade Michael Crichton, after his essay appeared, to come and actually testify in the U.S. Senate, the Environmental Public Work Committee, and he did it once. Everybody should look at the video. Such a powerful delivery, and people keep asking him to do it. He said, "No, I'm not doing it again. It's enough." You know, science turning into religion is a very dangerous thing.
For anybody who's not familiar with Michael Crichton, you're probably very familiar with a lot of his work.
Yeah.
He was an MD and like very intelligent man, but he's also a writer, a
Yeah,
director,
MD, PhD from Harvard Medical School, postdoc at the White House or White something Institute at Cambridge, one of those medical
yeah.
institutions.
He wrote if you watched in the 90s, there was a very popular TV series called ER about like a medical drama.
Oh
He
yeah,
also wrote Jurassic Park. He wrote a number of books. So if you've watched any of the Jurassic Park
Andromeda
films,
strain,
that's
and all of
Michael
that. Yeah, by
Crichton.
the way, all this virus stuff.
Oh yeah, he also did that, and then in towards the end of his life, which he died prematurely of like it was a heart
Cancer, yeah, it
attack
was the
or
cancer.
cancer. Okay, anyway, he said in this 2003 that consensus is invoked only in situations where the science is not solid enough. Nobody says that the consensus of scientists agrees that E equals mc squared. Nobody says the consensus is that the sun is 93 million miles away. It never occurred to anyone to speak that way. That's the point. You don't. Science, if there's facts, if everybody is an undisputed fact, you don't need a scientific consensus on it. You just present it.